Farms and homesteads are not animal sanctuaries. I think Old MacDonald did everybody a disservice when all we talked about with Old MacDonald was the sounds that the animals made, not the reason that Old MacDonald had them on the farm in the first place. Hello, welcome back to Sage and Stone Homestead. If you have not met me yet, my name is Heather. We like to share the good with the bad. The good stuff usually does better, like on YouTube, so a lot of different channels, that's all you're gonna see is the good, happy things. I think that that doesn't necessarily do homesteading justice, because there are equally as many very hard things that happen on a homestead, and that's kind of the topic of today's video. So as somebody who is on social media, I get a lot of inputs about my life from strangers, and that is not something that everybody is going to have to deal with. I'm going to be bringing some of that up today, but I think that it is going to be very relatable to some of you, because not everybody, even in our personal lives, is going to agree with or understand why we do the things that we do. And I hope at least a little bit that this conversation is going to help at least shine a light on some of these things and help make some people that might not understand a little bit more understanding where homesteaders are coming from and why they do what they do. So here on our homestead, we have big gardens that we tend to for not as much time as we tend to our animals. Our gardens do take a rest and the animals never do. We don't do our big meat harvests year round. That does kind of take a break for the garden season for a couple of reasons. I mean, animals need time to grow in order to be harvested, but also the garden does take a lot of time and effort, and it's nice to be able to kind of toggle between the two in the course of the year. So we are in the tail end of the meat harvest season, and so I've posted a lot of content that doesn't necessarily show the hardest part of meat harvesting, but I show you guys the animals. I've put a lot more effort in over the last couple years, or the last year or so probably, to show you guys the meat animals much more often than I used to. Just because when you are homesteading, that's kind of the reality of it. You do grow your meat animals on farm, you do see them every day, you do interact with them every day, so I feel like showing you how I interact with my meat animals will kind of help you understand how all that works. Keepers of any animal, to include livestock, have big responsibilities, but especially when you are breeding animals in order for them to have babies to benefit you and your family, there's a big responsibility there. Those animals wouldn't exist had it not been for your planning and your breeding and your intentions. And so there's responsibility that comes with that to care for those animals well. And I know that I'm preaching to the choir. A lot of you understand that as a no-brainer. But I think for some people, seeing that in action can be a little bit confusing. I have gotten questions lately, and I've gotten questions in the past about how we possibly could eat the animals that we seem to love. And I do have a video on that, and I will post that at the end of this one. I'm not going to do a lot of repeating that information, but I think there's a misunderstanding that's kind of broad out there in the universe and on the internet that care equates to love, and that is not always the case. Livestock animals, they're not pets. Even though they may get treats, even though they may get scratches, even though they're treated quite well, it doesn't mean that they hold a special place in my heart. It doesn't mean that there's some kind of bond there. I care for them because I respect them greatly, and for some reason that upsets some people. We'll get into that in just a little bit. But one of the ways that we can care for our animals on our homestead is to have a plan for them. So a lot of people have started following me, not only for the Raising Rabbit series that I posted a little over a year ago now, but also because they're interested in raising dairy goats. And there's a lot of positives to look forward to with both things, but along with the positives, as I mentioned, there are going to be some negatives, and we need to talk about that. It's very important, as I mentioned, for you to have a plan for your animals. So as an example, you're going to get dairy goats. In order to have your dairy goats come into milk, they have to be bred, they have to have babies. You want to have a plan for those babies, and for many people, the obvious plan is to post them for sale. That is great. Usually, baby goats, especially does, sell very well, and for us, there really hasn't been much issue in selling dairy does. Dairy Bucks, on the other hand, are a little bit different, and for them, I mean, you kind of have to come up with a plan B. So you've got your ideal situation, what you'd like to happen with those babies, and then there's what could happen if this doesn't work out. You've got to consider that. And that is going to look different for every person, every homestead, every farm. And so what I'm doing does not necessarily have to be what you do, but I would like to pose the possibility that you turn those unwanted dairy goats into meat animals. And that's hard for a lot of people to grasp when it comes to goats. For some reason, it's easier and more accepted when someone with a dairy cow turns, you know, the steer or the bull calf that their cow has into a steer in order to feed their family. For some reason, that is a lot more widely accepted than doing the exact same thing with dairy goats. It may be because here in the United States, goat is not a common menu item for Americans. It's really not. It's becoming more mainstream, and I think that is awesome. I really encourage people to at least entertain the idea of it. There is really a limit to how many animals you can keep on your farm. Sure, you can keep pets here and there, but there will come a time where you are at capacity with what you can handle as far as the amount of animals on your farm and how much they cost to keep, and you're gonna have to figure out what to do with inevitably the number of animals that have to be born just so your goat can come back into milk. Now, there are different things that you can do. A lot of people will run an extended lactation for their goats. Your goats have to be genetically very great at producing milk for a long length of time. So maybe think about that when you're purchasing your goats. If really you're not wanting to have too many kids born, you just want the milk, look into really good milk lines that are well known for their extended lactations. And understand too that just because you're keeping back a goat as a meat animal doesn't mean that you have to do the processing. Any processor that knows how to process a deer can process a goat, even if they don't have experience with it. I was actually quite surprised. The butcher that we took our pigs to, who does a lot of butchery for the community around here, he'd never processed a goat until recently. We brought one goat over to him so he could make a cape mount out of this goat. They were very excited to do that. It's the first time they had done a goat. They did an excellent job with him. But talk to them. It's not something that you necessarily have to take on yourself if you're uncomfortable with that part of the process. So having said that, I do want to bring up a little bit of kind of the uncomfortable part of that reality of having your own meat animals on your homestead. You come up with these really cute baby animals that are born on your farm. They're adorable. You want to snuggle on them. There's nothing wrong with loving on these creatures. I do it all the time. One of the reasons that we do handle our goats quite closely is because our plan A for most of them, especially the Nigerian dwarves, is to sell to pet families. So with things like rabbits, if you want to sell them as pets, same as goats, you really have to socialize them so they have the best opportunity to become pets, and for those people who purchase those pets to recommend your animals to also sell as pets in the future, like to their friends and whatnot. So we do handle our goats with that in mind, but it doesn't always work out. Sometimes a goat that has a name, has been handled, has been given treats and cookies, does end up going in the freezer because I need that space here on our farm. There's a huge misconception thinking that, okay, you got 10 acres of land, why can't you keep those goats on there? They can't be eating that much. Well, a lot of people don't know that stocking density is actually not as dense as you would think. So you see sometimes those like aerial views of feedlots and things where there's a ton of cows packed into these small little like lots where there's no grass and it's all mud. That is what most homesteaders are trying to avoid for their animals. We're not trying to recreate a system like that here. So really, if you are unable to rotationally graze your animals, as far as goats go, the stocking density per acre is 5 goats per acre, 5 standard goats per acre. We have 6 of it fenced in, so we can fit 30 goats in our big goat barn as well as on that pasture, and that is the limit. It's the limit for our pastures, so they don't get overburdened with the foot traffic and, you know, the inevitable excrement that goes on. And that's as much as our barn can take as far as space and ventilation and things. And to go above and beyond that wouldn't be smart. So we could not keep back goats that didn't sell every single year. It would just be a detriment on the health of our animals. And truthfully, because I have my plan A in place, not just for each individual animal, but for my herd as a whole, I have this goal to look forward to. I have this thing that I'm working on. For me, it's a certain breed of dairy goat. I'm working on a mini La Mancha herd that's going to be a great homestead animal to put out into the world for homesteaders to enjoy. That's not going to be everybody's goal. A lot of people's goal is going to be, I just want dairy. It's a very valid goal. But if this pet wether, this castrated male goat is on your farm, you got a whole bunch of them, what role is that animal playing towards your goal of dairy? They're probably not contributing very much into that goal. And so you've got to consider, okay, maybe I can keep one pet wether and justify his cost here on the farm because he can be a companion to my does or what have you. How much further beyond that are you able to go and not compromise on that original goal? So these are things to consider, because it's very easy to want to keep all the goats. Trust me, I know. It's very easy to want to keep them all, but you can eventually find yourself in a little bit of a pickle and in a situation where you have all of these goats that aren't contributing much towards your goals, and they're really kind of dragging your farm down. If you think about it too, even animal rescues have their limits. They have their density that they have to cap it off, or else it risks the health of the other animals. And the funds are limited in these places. They often get donations and things because it costs a lot of money to keep animals, no matter what situation you're in. And at a certain point, especially for a farm that's trying to be productive and trying to be smart about reducing costs for themselves, you can get really stuck with the animals that are just sort of pasture ornaments, as I think people call them sometimes. So just like most homesteaders are not trying to just recreate a feedlot situation on their land, most homesteaders are trying to improve the quality of life for their animals that are in their care. And I have noticed in the past, well, really ever since I've started doing this, but especially since the YouTube channel has taken off, that there is a decent amount of confusion mixed with hatred and disgust directed at people who genuinely actually care for the animals that will end up going in the freezer. It's a little bit backwards to me, and I would really like to talk about it. So as an example, I got a comment on a video where I had a baby rabbit that was way too small to be out of the nest, get out of the nest when it was very cold. I went down to go milk my goats, noticed that the baby rabbit was out of the nest. It was cold, it appeared dead, but really I know that usually when an animal gets hypothermic, they'll stay in this kind of frozen state where they're not really dead, and you can warm them back up and the animal can be just fine. So knowing that, what I do when I see this, which has happened more than one time, is I will take that baby rabbit, I'll put it in my shirt, which is nice and warm. Doing so lets me have both hands to continue doing my work, and as I'm working, the baby rabbit warmed up, which was awesome, and it lived. I put the baby rabbit back in the nest with its mother, and it ended up growing as intended and being part of our meat program, and the rabbit's in the freezer now. So I posted the video, it was a short, about recovering this baby rabbit and placing it back in the nest with its mother, because I knew it was going to be valuable for you guys to see that and to know that that's an option and that's a thing. And I got a comment on that video that said, well, you can't eat that rabbit now, that would be betrayal. And while I understand the short-sighted nature of that, like, okay, that would be a really nice story, right? To see this rabbit in its suffering state, to bring it back to life, and then just have this lovely story where now this rabbit, who is now a miracle, right, gets to live out its days on the grass and never has another care in the world, because now that I've spent so much time caring for this critter, I can't bear to think about parting with it. That is a story that I think would sell well, but is not the reality on most farms. I've said it before. Farms and homesteads are not animal sanctuaries. I think Old MacDonald did everybody a disservice when all we talked about with Old MacDonald was the sounds that the animals made, not the reason that Old MacDonald had them on the farm in the first place. I think that we really need to understand intention and understand that it is absolutely okay and accepted and should be celebrated that there's a human being out there that cares enough for the animal that does ultimately end up in the freezer, actually does so. I don't know why that would be seen as wrong. I do understand where this person is coming from. It's where a lot of people come from when their perspective has only been the grocery store. With a grocery store situation, when your meat comes lovingly packaged and it does not look anything like the animal that it came from, you can disassociate and not really have to think about it at all, ever. It's different when you live on the farm and you look at these animals every day, and especially when you process them with your own hands, you know good and well where that meat came from that is on your plate. And it's more than just what that animal ate. That's very important, to know what they ate and what they're made of and what is actually on your plate in that regard is a very important part of it. But to be able to see that as a living thing that deserved to not freeze to death, that deserved a chance at the life that you asked it to have so that it could feed your family, to live comfortably until the very last moment, I think that's a good thing. It's not going to be seamless, going straight from only seeing your meat in a cellophane package at the grocery store to raising it yourselves and even butchering it yourself. There's a transitional period there where baby steps have to be taken so that you don't get overwhelmed with what inevitably is kind of an emotional transition. But there is a point, and I think that we're there personally, where you are able to see what is out there on the farm for what it is and still be able to care for it like it deserves. I had another person come in on a different video with a different animal. It was my goats. It was when I fed the goats the animal crackers, and then subsequently I served goat for dinner that night. When I made that video, I knew that that wasn't going to be received well by everybody, because there's a lot of content out there on the internet with goats and how cute they are and whatever. I knew it was going to draw in the audience that just likes them as, you know, a pet. When you see goats as a pet like that, it would be hard to see them then served up for dinner that night. That, I could see how that there's a juxtaposition there, but that is the reality for us. It's going to be the reality for a lot more homesteaders to come. That's probably the reality for a lot of you. And so I decided to post that video, and I did get one comment that said something like, I don't understand how you could name an animal and feed it a treat and then go ahead and eat it. And I don't see how not. So in that situation, I was running around with this box of treats for my goats that I was giving out. If I were to pass over the goats that were destined to the freezer as if they didn't exist, that really would be disassociation to me. That would be kind of the same thing that happens inside the grocery store. I don't want to look at it. I don't want to acknowledge it. That doesn't exist right now and doesn't deserve my time. I'm not in that camp. I can, at this point, look at that goat, pet it, give it a name, give it a treat, and still eventually put it in the freezer. I have the end goal in my mind. But that animal, it still deserves my acknowledgement, it still deserves my recognition, and it still deserves to feel safe while it's here. And I'm not trying to make anybody feel guilty who doesn't give names to their meat animals, who doesn't look at them that often, and who doesn't, you know, give them treats and whatnot. As I mentioned, there's a spectrum here of going from the grocery store to butchering hands-on yourself. you don't go straight from here to there and there be no kind of transitional period. There is absolutely a transitional period, and you don't always have to be here. You don't always have to end up doing what I'm doing. You don't have to. It's just sometimes we get there, and I want that to be understood and more widely accepted, because it's happening in my comment section, but it's different when it happens in like your real life. And I do have some people in my real life that it's really hard for them to understand how I can do what I do. But really it's because of that original goal that I have for my farm. I have goals. Some of the animals that I have on my farm aren't meeting those goals, and I've tried to sell them. I can't force good homes to take them. Sometimes good homes just don't happen, and I need to make space because more baby goats are coming, and we decide to put our excess goats in the freezer, and that has been one of the most empowering, great decisions that we have ever made. So if you are somebody who unfortunately may deal with a little bit of clapback from friends or family when it comes to raising your own meat, I feel you. I have experienced that as well. There are people out there that just have a very hard time acknowledging what meat really is. And you being able to do that is a good thing. And their inability to do that, don't let that hinder you. Don't let that hinder you. You can do your best to educate these people, but they may never understand. For whatever mental block that they've made, they may never get it. And I want to be here as an encouragement to tell you that I see you, and that a lot of us deal with that, and it's okay. It's okay that they don't completely understand. They may not be 100% in our court. What I would really ask those people to do is to just understand that this really isn't easy. It does not come easy. It is not the easiest thing in the world to try to sell a goat for months that you thought was going to be a big part of your breeding program that turned out not to be. The goat doesn't sell, and you've got to put it in your freezer to make space for the animals that are going to be beneficial towards your end goal. I think the best thing that we can do is just to keep being an example. To try to change the tide, because usually the same people that are complaining about you for raising your own meat are buying at the grocery store, and they are supporting a system that is far worse, that is doing far worse things than what you are doing. I've got a couple of related videos that I'm gonna pop in here. This one talks about how much it costs to keep a dairy goat and whether or not they're worth it. And then down here I've got the video that I referenced in the beginning about how we can eat the animals that we love. It dives a little bit further into my heart space on that and how we feel towards our meat animals.